दिल्ली वासियों के लिए जो 5 फरवरी को वोट करने जा रहे हैं।
Hello and welcome to this webinar on whether Trump's America is still an attractive option for students in India planning to study in the United States. The context for this is, of course, what Donald Trump has done, has said, and seems to be planning to do regarding immigration. Immigration is on the top of his agenda in his politics, and how that could affect Indian students who were aspiring to study there. He has talked specifically about H-1B visas. So how, because Indian students eventually, I mean, that's the plan. They go to America, study, and want to work and build a professional career there. And so how is that going to affect? So all these questions we are here to discuss, perhaps enlighten students, parents, and others who are tuning in. We have a very, very distinguished panel. We are very glad that they're here to tell students about this. I could introduce Sri Srinivasan. He's a he was a professor of economics at the Jawaharlal Nehru University. And we have Manjunath Gokre, who's a lawyer and who's an immigration lawyer of some 25 years standing. So he deals with these questions every day, the admissions and visas, H-1B. More importantly, for in particular relevance to this webinar, student visas also. So they'll be here answering questions. Feel free to jump in, ask questions, those who've registered for the webinar. So we'll roll. We'll roll with Professor. And by the way, all the three panelists are in North America. Sri is in Mexico. Gokre is in Atlanta. And Professor Kadria is in which city, sir?
Princeton.
Princeton, okay. So it's early morning there. Good morning to everybody. So perhaps I could start with Professor Kadrias. What is happening, sir? We hear, of course, today's big news in Indian media is that the deportees were handcuffed. So it seems to give an indication of how Indians are being viewed. What is happening on the ground? Mahol kya hai? Or what is, especially including in universities, how do our Indian students, how are they feeling any difference? Are they feeling less welcome, more welcome, or are they apprehensive about what's going to happen? What is Trump saying, doing, and what do you think he will do in terms of specific policies going beyond the rhetoric?
Yeah.
So,
Thank you, Kalyan, and good morning, everyone. I think if I have to describe the situation, the environment here, in one word, then there is a bit of uncertainty. That's what is, because the new administration is very new. As you can see that it was in the swearing in was on 20th of January, and it's not even a month, from that. And then the President Trump passed a number of executive orders, and one was a couple of them were related to migration, and that's where I think the issue of international education or international students is related to. Now, of course, for President Trump, this is second term, and it can be seen as a continuation of his policies in the first term that he had said, and then whatever he promised during his election campaign, he's going to implement those promises that have been made, and that's where I think it's very relevant. So, as far as students are concerned, international students are concerned, the universities and institutions in the United States are very much dependent on them, because um, international students number is very, very large here, and it's a second largest export industry in the US, because the overseas student fees, whether it comes from the students' parents' pockets or from scholarships or from donations and so on, because the institutions actually run on them, on that funding. So it is the question of funding the institutions which is under radar. And right now, the question of uncertainty is because many of the institutions, public institutions, particularly federal institutions, what we in India we call central government institutions, they are facing a funding cut, and that is going to affect the institutions, the programs that are going to be offered, particularly some of the frontier programs, say, for example, um, in climate, because climate is one particular subject where President Trump has withdrawn the membership of United States in many of the international collaborations and so on. So that this is, and similarly, there may be other subjects which are going to be affected because of the funding withdrawal. Um, One of the institutions which is suddenly the employees found that their office is closed is USAID. USAID, and that is going to have worldwide repercussions, because USAID programs have been worldwide. And Colombia, for example, I mean, you mentioned, Kalyan just mentioned about the deportation of illegal Indians. Yes, this week, last week. But prior to that, it was the Colombian illegal immigrants who were to be deported. It's another matter that the president of Colombia did not accept the US military plane to fly them to Colombia. Uh, they refused permission for this plane to land there, and then the president sent a Colombian aeroplane to take those illegal migrants here and the citizens of Colombia back. And that's the issue which is now very topical in India, that why Indian government didn't send its own plane to bring them back, why it allowed an US military plane to land in India. And that's what is happening in the Indian parliament. So this will have, some repercussions on international relations vis-a-vis United States. And then, of course, as I said, uncertain. So it's very difficult to predict what is going to come, what is in store. And that's where I'll stop. Thank you.
Yes, in fact, when just before we went on live, we were discussing, the panelists themselves were making travel plans and wondering if they could come back to the United States. And Sri said, "We don't know. Nothing is certain." He said, "Well, Sri, what you've taught in institutions, you've dealt with students. What are institutions thinking? State, private, whoever, what are they thinking regarding Trump, his policies? Will they take international students? Professor Binod talked about how they are important for the funding, but what is their thinking process now?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on the show, and delighted to answer any questions that the students and parents will be having right now. I think the professor used a very good term, uncertainty, right now in the US. Another term, another word you can use is chaos. And that's really what we're experiencing here. Every few minutes, it seems, but it's every few hours, there's some new announcement, executive order, new plan from President Trump that is just so far away from anything that's kind of the norms in American civil society, the way the country has worked for the last, let's say, 50, 60 years. So it's very hard to keep up. and it's that confusion, that chaos, that uncertainty is all part of the plan. Everything that he is doing now, almost everything he's doing now, he was laid out in Project 2025, the book that was put together by a very conservative foundation, which he disavowed. He said he's not going to do that. And on the campaign trail. So that's the first thing that Indians should understand as they're looking at the chaos from over there. The second is that if it's particularly in the education field, a lot of the ways in which things work, there was an understanding that elite education is a good thing in the US. Donald Trump is a product of the University of Pennsylvania, an Ivy League school. J.D. Vance went to multiple very elite universities. But this new MAGA world, making education an enemy, is part of the appeal and how they've been successful. So even before the current chaos, because of what happened in Israel and Gaza over the last 2 years, there have been protests in U.S. universities that has the protests have resulted in multiple, because of a series of cascading events, multiple university presidents have lost their jobs in the U.S. Because of how the protests were handled and the accusations of anti-Semitism, anti-Israel stances. So all of this has been already there before the current situation. And we should also note that there are about 300,000 plus Indian students who study here in the US. As we heard, they're an important part of the US economy, but universities are being targeted by the Trump administration. By the way, they're also looking at eliminating the Department of Education. I mean, these are things that if you're sitting in India, you just cannot understand the scale and scope of what is being done at the moment. So my advice to parents and students who are looking to come to the US, some of you will have already applied and you have to arrive here in September, get your visa, come here in September, that being paying really close attention to what's happening is important. That's why you're watching this show right now. But also to understand that the education system is, I think, the education you will get at a, not just a top 10 school, but a top 50, top 100 school in the US is going to continue to be very good. But the uncertainty that comes from other aspects, what will happen to jobs, what will happen to the anti-Indian sentiments that you hear in some places. I will pause after telling you about one particular incident that has happened just in the last 12 hours or so. There was one of these very young people who Elon Musk has brought in and is part of the chaos, that's the chaos quotient that's happening here. One of them resigned because he had been posting racist things on Twitter, specifically anti-Indian racism, including saying, let's promote Indian hate. That's a good thing, and slamming Indians, including H-1B visa holders. That man resigned. He was 25. He resigned. But J.D. Vance and Elon Musk have put him back in the job. Elon Musk said that we need to give him another chance. J.D. Vance said we need to give him another chance. J.D. Vance, who has an Indian American wife, is basically condoning Indian American hate in that particular incident. So that's where we are right now. I wouldn't say don't come to America or anything like that at the moment, but just know that the series of things that you want to do when you come to the US, work here, learn here, work here, all of that is, as that word that we've been using so much already, is uncertain at the moment.
But will institutions balk at taking Indian students or international students?
No, they need international students.
They need-
International students form a cash cow in many programs. So they'll need to do that. Also, about 20, 30 years ago, but there weren't as many undergrad students coming from India to the US. Now that number has spiked because banks give you loans, things like that. It was impossible to see almost any undergraduate Indian students, just not a handful, but they would be in the hundreds. Now they're in the tens of thousands. So that's the change. That's one of the changes that's happened in the equation.
They bring in more money, right? Undergrads.
Yeah, exactly.
The figure we hear is $8, $9, $10 billion that Indian students bring to US universities every year. And I'm told that's correct, Professor.
65% of the cost of education is borne by the parents, and as she has said, bank loans. And bank loans are public money. These are your parents' money indirectly that is being given at subsidized rates of interest. So these are wheels within wheels. There are so to say interconnections that you can say. And as she has pointed out, you see, the Indian students used to come for postdoctoral education here, and then it started coming downwards for doctoral level, for master's level, and now undergraduate, even school level students have been coming, not only here, baccalaureate, for example, baccalaureate programs, and there are even schools within India where the baccalaureate program is being provided for the purpose of getting ready to come to the rest of the world. So that's very, very important. And as Kalyan, you asked this specific question about what the institutions are thinking. The institutions themselves are also in a fix. They are not. They are that within the next 30 to 60 days they will know better which way this is going. So, as I said, uncertain. The situation is uncertain for them also. So, but as she pointed out, the session begins in September. So there are a couple of months, lag between that time and now for wait and watch kind of a situation. So that's very important.
Okay. Maybe a good time to go to Manjunath, who's been have changes to the student visa processing. Has anything happened yet already, or what do you think is going when the Indian student goes to the consulate and presents his application? Will it be viewed any differently because of what Trump is doing? Even if the student decides that he's better off, he's assured, he's confident of going to America and studying. You think anything has changed? What has happened?
Thank you, Kalyan. Thank you for the opportunity to be on this panel. So to pick back on what Sri has been talking and what Professor Kadri has been talking, there is confusion and there is chaos, certainly, but they're more in the area of removal or deportation of people who are here unlawfully. Two campaign pledges which Trump made was basically starting the largest mass deportation campaign in the history of America, sending people who are here unlawfully back to their home countries. And in this connection, they picked up on a debt we had in my state. I'm in the state of Georgia. There was a student in the University of Georgia, and she was killed by a Venezuelan illegal immigrant and who had been picked up for shoplifting and released. So they passed a law called the Lake and Riley Act, which broadly expands the ability of the ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, to deport people back. So that's the sort of like the backdrop we have here. And the second issue we saw during the campaign and also now is all the sort of anti-India sentiment, especially when it comes to H-1B visas, right? So we have all heard of, people being opposed to H-1B visas because people believe that H-1B visas are a drag on the economy and they take away jobs from U.S. workers. So that's really the two areas where there's a lot of confusion and there's a lot of noise. But to your question, Kalyan, I don't think I've seen any significant discussion on the impact of Trump administration and Trump administration's policies on F1 students. I think it's still sort of like, it's an open-ended question. So to pick back up again on a couple of the points which the other panelists have made, education is a big industry in America. It brings in a lot of revenue for both state schools, which are public schools, and private schools. For example, in our state, in Georgia, Georgia Tech is a very reputable institution, and roughly half of the student body at Georgia Tech is international, which means these are students who have come from abroad. And so, to Professor Kadria's point, either the student or the parents or the bank, somebody is paying those fees. And these are significant. They pay something called 3 times the tuition which an in-state student pays. So they pay out-of-state tuition. Like a typical Georgia Tech education is like $40,000, $50,000 a year. So people understand that you don't really want to stem the flow of foreign students coming into the U.S. India, I think the other panelists commented as to how big of a source of students it is for the U.S. So I think my view is the F1 pipeline will continue, but people will have to, in India, have to make better judgments as to what I call ROI, return on investment. You're making a significant investment when you're coming into the US and studying here. So what are my long-term path here? I mean, will I get an H-1B? Will I get OPT? Will I get CPT? I'll explain what those terms are. And will I be able to, will I have a path towards a green card, eventually? So these are some of the things people need to be thinking about. And I'll just touch on one more point and sort of like yield the floor to the other panelists. The other thing also is, like, when it comes to ROI, people need to be judicious into what schools they come in, into the US, be it undergrad for bachelor's or master's or PhD. So the top 10, top 50 schools which Sri was talking about, if you go to one of those schools, obviously you'll be fine. But unfortunately, in my 25, 26 years of practice, of last 10 years, I'm seeing a lot of Indians coming into schools which are for-profit and private schools, which are, I would not spend my money if I were them to come to those schools and attend them, because there's really not a lot of value those schools had. So I'll stop there. To summarize, Kalyan, I think F1 is still an open question, and F1 may not get affected that much, because it's a source of revenue for these institutions, and they understand that, the government understands that. But the broader issue is beyond F1 when it comes to H-1B and a path towards a green card. Am I making the right investment in coming into the US? So it's
Yes,
it's an individual sort of determination. So I'll sort of leave it at that. There's a lot of things we have talked about, myself and the other two panelists. I think we'll probably, as the questions come in, pick up on certain threads and elaborate more.
Sri, you're muted.
Sorry, I'll just pick up on a couple of quick things. One is that the employment situation is an important question for everybody, whether you're American or international. And we just saw statistics recently that Harvard Business School, widely considered the top business school in the US, 23% of their graduates with an MBA are unemployed 3 months after graduation. And that's the highest number that they've had. And so that tells you that if Harvard Business School students are having difficulty getting jobs, then you can imagine any other kind of degree. There are fewer job opportunities, these shifts that are happening. That's all again before the chaos of now. So that's one thing to remember. The way in which immigrants have been demonized in the United States by the president onwards, you're seeing the impact of that. So even what has happened with this act, the Riley Act that was mentioned, it sounds completely valid that you should not have undocumented or illegal immigrants who are arrested, let go, and then they go and kill. That is been used, however, now the power that's been given to the states to go after immigrants is going to be used for all kinds of things. So you could be accused of shoplifting, and without the due process of the law that you would have had in previous years, you can be deported. Things like that there's going to be these repercussions of that act that are going to be a problem. We also talked about those Indians who have been sent back, the compared to how Colombia accepted them versus India. But also, we saw immediately India said, we'll take 18,000 Indians back to India. There are 700,000 illegal Indians who will fall under that category. So how will India manage that is also going to be part of the question. Now, if you're a student, I just want to read a comment that came in from an administrator I know at an American university who said, I cannot imagine the US is an attractive option for anyone, to be honest, not just Indians. For Indians in particular, I would think that visas, money, discrimination, post-education, employment impact would be things that we have to watch out for. So I think we've touched upon this, but to hear this from an American administrator is interesting at this moment.
So one of the questions was, what message is Trump trying to deliver? Or what message should students take from whatever is happening or whatever he's saying and planning to do?
Can I jump in?
Yes, everybody.
So the message is America first, right? So that's the message they are trying to send. And there is, Shri talked about Project 2025. They're trying to reimagine the federal government. They're trying to reimagine the way America works. And they're going after what they feel are, programs with a certain level of wokeness built into it, like USA. These are their views, right? So it's an America first policy, and that's where the H-1B discussion comes in. And but there are voices on both sides, like even within the Trump administration. Let me come to H-1Bs. You have people like Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy and David Sachs, who are all who have benefited from the H-1B program and who are in support of Indians and H-1Bs and whatnot. But then there are restrictionist voices within the MAGA movement, the Make America Great Again movement. And these are people like Stephen Miller and Laura Loomer and Steve Bannon, and they are extremely opposed to H-1B. So the tension, the chaos which Professor Kadria and Shri is talking about is very visible even within the H-1B movement. So it's the chaos from the, even from the opposing sort of voices and views within the administration. So we don't know how it's all going to play out, which side will prevail over the others. It's an open question, like I said earlier. It remains to be seen. But to the question, what are we trying to do here? I think it's an America First policy, and that's the reason why they're coming down hard on. And Shri talked about 750,000 illegal Indians in the U.S. It's a huge number, right? So India will have to work out some sort of an arrangement with the U.S. to really take some of them back. And Modi is coming here probably in the next week or so. And I'm sure all these things will be on the table for discussion, and I think people come to go back to the F1 question, because this panel is about F1.
Yeah.
People coming to good schools, people making the right choices, and people looking at, and America is still a mecca for higher education. I mean, we have all benefited from US. I came here as a graduate student after finishing civil engineering in India. I came here, did a master's, and then I went to law school here. It's a fascinating place if you play by the rules, and that's what this administration is trying to focus on. Let it be an America First agenda. Let's welcome those who play by the rules, and let's not be a sort of an open door for everybody. So that's what you see. So,
Okay.
long answer to a short question.
No, is there is it justified that Indians, because legal immigration is okay, so Indians are getting there to study and then they'll get jobs, H1B, so that pathway is still open for Indians, and Trump is not going to disrupt that. Is that a fair assessment, or is he going to change that too? That the transition from student to H1B and green card and all that, that's going to get.
Kalyan, what happened with Canada last year? See, the spat that was there between Trudeau and India government led to cancellation of some visa schemes, student visa schemes in Canada, and that put people, students in a spot. Not only Indian students, but Nigerian students also. Those were special visa programs, express entry programs, and so on. Prior to that, what was happening? The H1B visa itself is a very uncertain program so far as companies are concerned. Company based, there are two kinds, company based and the non-profit institutions, university based H1B visas. The company based visas are subject to lottery, and an aspirant can take part only 3 times. So many of the bright students were unlucky not to be picked up by the lottery, and then they found it in fact, it was officially announced by Canada that they would welcome H1B rejects from the United States. So they were going there, but then what happened? The new political situation that emerged between Trudeau and India led to cancellation of those visa programs. And as I said, that led to the uncertainty. It multiplied. And you are right. It's not what message he wants to give, but what message is, received by the people. And as she had mentioned, that even shoplifting. The shoplifting can be deliberate, it can happen by default, but the punishment can be so huge that it would be only an excuse. For example, now you hear that large number of Indian students who are working part-time to earn on the sidelines, they are allowed to work within the campus, but many of the students, of course, take liberty and work outside the campus. And the administration was ignoring those things, but now they will come under the scanner. So immediately there was a rush for giving up those kind of part-time jobs by the Indian students. We read that in the newspapers and so on. So as I said, it's snowball effect, or wheels within wheels are there, which actually create. So it's an unknown territory, what is there to come. And it's the person on the spot, the officer on the spot, how that person interprets. The powers are enormous. And how, see, for example, it is being said that it is standard operating procedure to handcuff them or to put chains. Even the Indian foreign minister is saying that. But to what extent? you know they were not even allowed toilet facilities. That's being alleged. We don't know what happened inside the aircraft. So there is a completely blind spot, which one has to take care of. That's It's not an alarm. One does not have to create a panic situation, but at the same time, as she mentioned, that you have to be aware of the repercussions. If you are coming here for undergraduate education and then you think that you will stay here, become a permanent resident and then a citizen and take up jobs here, then that's one option. If you are coming here to have good quality education, as Manju said, uh, it's the Makkah of education. Of course, it's a Makkah of education. Who has made it Makkah of education? Indians have made it Makkah of education. Look at the number of faculty, the Indian faculty which is there. We have Nobel laureates. Uh, you know, that itself is a questionable. Why only the Western citizens get Nobel prizes? Only one or two get Indians or other countries, South countries of the developing world get them. But you can find Indians there. That's because they have tried to be part of this development program, whether they are located in the United States or in India. So if you have this aspiration that I'll go back to my country and contribute there or go to the grassroots level development, uh, we are, of course, a developing country. We are dreaming of becoming a Vikasit Bharat by 2047, as our Prime Minister has given that agenda. But who will make it Vikasit Bharat? People who will have best of education in the world and go back and, and contribute to our education, to our health, to our productivity. That I think is there. And undergraduate students do have those aspirations, and over time they get hardened and because the reality is different than what you dream. So you have to anticipate.
You talked about Indian professors. Sri was a well-known journalism professor, so he's right there with us.
Yes.
Um, Sri, so this we have a question. For instance, Lakshmi Srinivas, she's saying America thrives on global talent. So is it easy for them to implement a harsh policy on student visas and immigration? Can people just ride out? Trump is going to be there for 4 years. So can Indians just ride out this phase and then everything will go back to normal?
These are such good and important issues that we're discussing here. I think that we need to keep in mind that this America First agenda is not just a Trump agenda. This has become the kind of soul of the Republican Party, which was a global party that welcomed immigration compared to the Democrats for so many decades. Has been kind of turned upside down. And so after Trump, things could get better or could get worse. We don't know at the moment. But we should also note that this America First agenda is being run by Elon Musk, who Time magazine put on the cover, sitting in the Oval Office behind the Resolute desk, the president's desk, saying he's running things. And he's a South African immigrant who, by the way, as a student, broke the visa rules himself and was out of status or would have been illegal for several months. But just because he was white, because of his the programs that he was involved in, and just because he had the guts to just keep moving as he does in so many different fields, you're seeing what he was able to do and what he's the one running the country today. And so this idea of where we go with the student visas is not clear. And we're seeing that the pipeline of where students come in, they get educated, they get that visa to work here. All of that is at the moment okay, but we don't know where it'll go. And at any time, there could be a decision saying we're going to cut back the number of H-1B visas. We're going to, curtail the number of students. Anything could happen. So you have to go in with those eyes open. I want to read a comment that I asked a friend who's a parent in India, who says, this is what she wrote to me. As a mother whose daughter will leave for undergrad studies in the US this August, frankly, we're worried that recent moves by Trump will increase the hostility towards international students, particularly brown students and those from India. We have always considered the US as a place of progressive values and a great quality higher education. I hope it remains welcoming to students and other international students. That's to Indians and other international students. So this is a worry that parents who've already committed a lot of money to having their children come here are going to have to see. My suggestion has always been for Indians to do their undergraduate studies in India. So many good schools in India, so many new liberal arts and other kinds of educational institutions in India, around India, and then come here for postgraduate studies. But we're seeing, as I said before, so many more undergraduate students coming here, and we'll see how that plays out.
Thank you, Sri. Manjunath, yesterday, I mean, let's look at a little the reverse side of the equation. It's that Indians misusing the student visa. And you felt Trump may have a relook at that. We do hear, I mean, it's not just Trump, other administrations do crack down on dodgy universities who take students, give out the visa, and this CPT, not the OPT, the CPT process, it's misused by Indians getting there, and Trump will likely crack down on them. Are there, before Indian students apply to study in the US, should they be wary of what institutions will specific things be targeted by Trump, even if he chooses to leave F1 untouched?
No, that's an excellent question, Kalyan. So let's assume that there will not be a lot of changes to the F1 program because, like we have all discussed, it's a revenue source, and and if you cut off the cash cow, these universities are going to suffer. So, assuming that there are still sort of like systemic sort of like problems with some of the colleges which have cropped up in the last 10, 15 years. So, based on my own observation, like 25, 30 years back, people would come for graduate studies, and people would come to good schools, and they followed sort of the traditional path. But what we have seen in the last decade or 2 decades is a mushrooming of private for-profit schools, and what we call as Day 1 CPT schools. And all these schools, they basically get you in, and they offer hybrid education. You don't even have to be on campus. You can be in Atlanta and attending a school in Louisville, Kentucky, and you fulfill the core curriculum requirements. But they also authorize Day 1 CPT from day one, which is work authorization. So a lot of the students we see, I would say at least 25, 30%, coming from India for graduate studies in the US are coming into these Day 1 CPT programs, which are problematic and which are sort of like in the gray area of law. And to your question, Kalyan, we are expecting that there will be a likely crackdown on these sorts of programs because they're really in the gray area of law, like I mentioned. And to my earlier point, students and parents also have to look at an ROI. I mean, if you're coming into those sorts of schools, what kind of education are you getting, and what is your long-term sort of prospects when it comes to employment and all that. So I think, to your point, even if the F1 program remains untouched, we will see changes in some the way some of these schools operate, and Day 1 CPTs and all of that, which are really in the gray area of law, which is attracting a lot of Indian students from certain parts of the country, and you would see a tighter sort of like tightening of the bolts on those programs. We can elaborate as to further if there are any questions on that.
I will just say that Manju was, I think, pretty optimistic. He said that because the universities would be affected badly if visas were curtailed, that would have been something that in a regular administration, or even in the first Trump administration, would have said, yes, that would be bad for less money to come in. But now, if that'll hurt universities, that'll be considered a good thing by many people in the MAGA movement, because they consider these elite universities a problem, even though, as I said, Musk, Vance, all of these people, Vivek Ramaswamy, all of them went to the same elite schools that they are targeting, and by pretending they're like people of the, they're like of the people who are not as educated. That's part of the concern we have now.
So
Yeah, I mean,
one of the,
it's a fair point, Sri. It's an open question in all these areas,
Yeah,
H-1B, long-term
it is.
immigration, because
Yeah,
I
that's
speak to
cuts on
I
both sides.
speak to our congressman from the 7th District of Georgia. There are, even within the Republican Party, huge sort of like divisions. Not
Yes.
everybody is supportive of the MAGA policies. So our congressman understands that if you really have to reform the system rather than throwing the baby out with the proverbial throwing of the baby out with the bathwater. So the point being, um, who knows how it's all going to play out in the longer term. I was only making the assumption that, assuming that the F1 program remains untouched, there are still within the F1 program some aspects of the F1 program, like I talked about Dave and CPT, which will get affected because they clearly, those programs are being misused, and they are being targeted. And so that was my sort of larger point.
Yeah. No, I can see, both sides, what Manju has said and Sri has also mentioned. But when see it from the point of view of the parent who asked this question, then I tend to think, and I would go with Sri in saying that undergraduates, is a gray area going abroad at undergraduate level, and she said that there are so many good schools and good colleges and good undergraduate education in India. That's one side. The other side is the students. What is the age group of those students? What generation do they belong to? That's a very is a generation which is very vulnerable generation in terms of going to an alien culture. I'm using the term that is being used for us. Actually, the aliens are non-Americans, are aliens, but it is a culture which is different. uh, Here the students are left to themselves. They have to fend for themselves, and then there is a culture shock. So there are isolated cases where things may go wrong, go into a direction which one would not like them to go to. But this number of probability does not work. It is, as I say, that every child is a precious child to his or her own parents, so that the large law of large numbers does not apply to them. That if the probability is low, does not matter, but this, I may be the unlucky one to get affected by that. So that's where I think one has to play that card very, very carefully of trying to send undergraduate students, because they are still in tender age. As far as Indian children are concerned, they have lived in under the protection of their children, of their parents, of their friends, and so on. It's a different culture here. You have to fend for yourself, and that's where I think it's very important to have a balanced picture between what is the larger picture and what is going to be at the micro level, at the level of the family, at the level of the individual. And that's where I think it's important. And you are right, see, that uh, the better universities are right now the targets, because progressive ideas are not something that the the right wing regimes would welcome. And this is applicable everywhere. This is applicable in Europe. This is applicable in India also. So that's why you see why progressive universities are under target, are under the scanner, and they are maligned. They are also being the fund is cut. Fund cutting is a very, very strong weapon to make them silent. So I think we need to take this view of what is the larger picture and what is the micro level picture for the families. That
an important takeaway that seems to be emerging, which Sri made the point and others also, that education itself is under attack. This there's this culture that America has of valuing education. It was considered sacred. It was considered as a means to draw talent. The Republican Party is actually more favorable towards legal, quote unquote, legal immigration, because they saw it as a way to bring in talent to keep America on the cutting edge, because they enrich business and so on. But that itself is under attack. And so, big universities, education is not this sacred, holy thing that America has always stood for. That's a very important takeaway. Um, what I think eventually, as we talked about the pipeline, the student pipeline, we'll have to deal with this question. But although it's a little tangential to the student thing, but it's still very relevant. How much will the axe fall on the H-1B program? Will there be cutbacks? Because eventually, I think the corporates will have a definite say in whatever decision Trump makes. Are corporates saying, will they go, yes, let's America first, let's recruit just Americans, let's not bring in H-1Bs? Although there was a little caveat somewhere that anybody who studies in America should get the H-1B, not someone who's not studied and coming just for the H-1B. I mean, besides those divisions, do you think the H-1B program is going to face the axe from Trump?
I think that you will see the way that inauguration took place. The people who were in behind Trump were not the elected representatives, but Zuckerberg, Musk, Bezos, Sundar Pichai was there as well, and these are all huge users of the H-1B visa. The question, and that visa is a program that needs reform anyway. But as we're seeing with things, as we're seeing with USAID, is that it's not like, okay, there's an issue, let's fix it, let's keep the good parts, remove the bad parts. It's this axe falling and just immediately hurting people. You know, there's a saying here that when you see the cruelty that's being done with the Trump administration, the cruelty is the point. That's like part of how they operate. So as a parent or a student looking at studying in the US, you have to know that they will continue to push for those H-1B visas. They will have a thumb on the scale, as we say here. But which kind of H-1B visas? The H-1Bs that benefit companies that bring people from India, or the students who study here? Trump at some point had said that people who get advanced degrees should get a green card automatically. So, but he's all over the place. He often responds to the last person who was in the room with him, the last idea he heard. So that tension that we have talked about is going to continue to be there. This idea of ROI that Manju has used so well, like, you have to decide, is it worth sending your children here for an undergraduate degree? As I said, long before this, for the last 30 years, I've said, come for your postgraduate education here. Then you know what you want. You know what you want to study. You have a better idea of your job, career ideas, things like that. So now my message would be, unless you've already committed to this year, really think about coming here for your postgraduate degree before you come for your undergraduate degree.
Professor Bino, do you think the H-1B, the corporates would agree to an axe falling on the H-1B program? Or do you think they would have this?
Corporate sector certainly, I mean, this is not new. Corporate sector has always been saying that H-1B is very important, is lifeline for them. And whenever this kind of situation has occurred, even during COVID period, it had happened, they were saying, how are we going to run our industry and business? So that's a lifeline. But as she said, they don't care. They don't care because of the regions that, you know, America first has its costs, and they are willing to bear that cost. So that, I think, is extremely important. But as you know, Manju and she mentioned, H-1B has many layers. You know, subject-wise also, science subjects have different lifetime for H-1B visas, and you know, social sciences, liberal subjects have different you know, timeline in terms of 3 years or 6 years or 7 years and so on. So one has to take a microscope and look at them and how this is going to end. People are not going to be just stuck with H-1B visa. They will try to transit from H-1B visa to to the green card, whatever, what is called the, legal permanent residence, that status, and then to citizenship. So there is a pathway to migration, that you come as a student and then you end up as becoming finally citizen. It's your choice whether you want to go that way or not, because it's a long journey, and that journey has many hurdles. So one has to be prepared for those hurdles. If you're mentally and physically and financially prepared for those hurdles, then it's okay. But if you think that these are going to be surprises for you, then you better sit back and think again.
Manjunath, the bulk of your clients are H1B. What are you
half,
hearing?
half our business is H1B, right?
So what are you hearing?
So I mean, to Shree's point, to Professor Kadria's point, H1B will change. There are certain problems with the current setup we have of the H1B program. The H1B program is heavily used by India and Indians to the extent of like 70-75%. And there are some discussions to make it more merit-based, to favor students who have graduated from US universities, undergrad and masters. So I think, those changes may probably be a good thing, and it may benefit students from India who are coming in on F1 visas, who are looking to transition into H1Bs, and they're not competing with people who are sitting in India, right, and who have never studied in the US. So you will see some changes. We recently, USCIS came out with the H1B modernization rule. So that will get implemented, and there are changes to the way the H1B registration program is administered to reduce fraud in that. That took place last year. So I think even before Trump came in, people realized that this program is valuable. We need to preserve it. A lot of companies like Facebook and Meta and Facebook and Google and Microsoft, they've all benefited and they're in support of it. So I think my view, I'm an optimist. So I think it will survive, but it'll undergo some changes, and the changes will again sort of like benefit those who have gone to school here and who have studied in the US and graduated from US universities and all that. So that may be a good thing.
Oh, that's certainly a positive note in this largely bleak scenario that you see.
Now, I think also we have to remember this H1B discussion is sort of overblown. If you really look at the number of H1B visas, it's 65,000 for everybody and 20,000 for US advanced degree holders. So it's such a small number when it comes to the size of the US economy and the number of jobs we have here, right? So, like with everything, it just gets a lot of attention. I think it'll survive. I think it'll undergo some changes, probably for the better.
Shri had a question actually for Manju. He was asking, can you explain the green card backlog issue? Lots of confusion there.
That's a whole other problem, right? it's a huge problem. So people ask me this question all the time, including elected officials and whatnot, who don't really quite understand the scale of the problem we have here. I mean, I'm sure all of you have famously heard, people have to stand in the green card queue for 25, 30 years to get a green card if you're born in India. And these are true, and the backlogs are enormous. So the framework we are operating in, the laws we have, are from 35 years ago, 1990. And the economy, US economy, was a $5 trillion economy, just slightly larger than what the current Indian economy is today, right? But so the visa numbers and everything was tailored towards a $5 trillion economy, and nothing has changed in the last 35 years. We have the same framework, but we just have more people standing in line. So obviously, the length of time it takes to receive a green card if you're India born is enormous, and it's a huge problem. And US is currently a 27, $28 trillion economy. We all know that, right? So US economy has grown 5-6-fold from the time this framework was put in place. So elected officials do understand that. And so our congressman here, Dr. Rich McCormick, 14% of his district is Indian. So he understands very well the issues which are faced by Indians, right? So I've met with him, I've had breakfast with him for an hour, hour and a half. So there are forces within even the current sort of Congress who understand the problems. But will anything get done? I don't know, because there is so much noise regarding illegal immigration, H-1Bs, and this and that, right? Every day, like she said, there's a pronouncement, an executive order, and something. Or the fact that we are all talking regarding F1 and all that in itself, it tells you, like, every day is a new thing. But if you separate all the noise and if you step back, there are people within the administration who do understand, and within the current Congress, that there's a problem. You need to fix this problem. Otherwise, US is not going, to Lakshmi's point, will not be a source, will not receive some of the best and brightest people from all over the world, right? So it's going to hurt us in the long run. And so hopefully there'll be some changes. Again, I'm an optimist, so let's hope in the next few years, there will be some common sense reform, removing per country limits for India, and also increasing the number of immigrant visas which are made available for India. Because like I said, the framework you had is from 35 years ago. It's not applicable to the current economy we have. So we need to look at this smartly, and hopefully they'll, once again, like I talked about the H-1B program being reformed to really suit the current needs. Hopefully the immigrant visa framework will also get reformed, which benefits India in the long run. So again, I go back to the very initial points I made. People have to be smart about coming into the US. So you just don't come to the US without thinking through things. Maybe come here like Sri and Professor Kadri have talked about for a master's level. So you're well aware of yourself, and then hopefully if you attend good schools, things will play out for you in the longer term. And let's not be discouraged by all the noise out there, and hopefully better senses will prevail, because there are voices which do understand that the problems.
Thank you, Manjunath. Thanks, everybody. Very important takeaways from this. That there is a lot of chaos and confusion, and it's all thought through. There is a method in the madness. This is deliberate. This is happening for certain reasons. And then there is an attack on the concept of education itself. Education institutions are no more this venerable big thing. There is a substantial population opinion out there in the US that doesn't anymore look up to these higher education institutions. That's a big change, I suppose. And to be careful, everyone who wants to study in the US, carefully weigh the options, because eventually something is going to happen. A lot of changes will happen. But we heard some positive things that Indian students may find it easier to get a H-1B. Manjunath was saying, sane voices, despite all the clutter, all the talk against immigrants, he's hopeful that the green card backlog will also get cleared. Someone will attend to it. He hopes that there are saner voices everywhere. Rational thinking will take over at some point in the US. There are enough rational people, smart people there. That's his hope. Thanks, everybody. Sri, wonderful. Good seeing you again. Professor Binod, Manjunath, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kalyan, for organizing this wonderful panel.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed being a part of it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Arush.
Bye-bye.
दिल्ली वासियों के लिए जो 5 फरवरी को वोट करने जा रहे हैं